There is a word in my language that does not translate cleanly into yours. The nearest your records give me is void, but that is a thin word, and ours is a heavy one. When an Oruvith reclaim master walks a salvage lot and lays a hand on the cold spine of a dead engine, and then turns to the gratting column and speaks that word, it is not an estimate. It is a verdict. It means the thing is past saving, that no skill in any guild on any world will draw work from it again, that it will be fed to the slag throats and remembered as nothing. For 900 years my people have lived and ruled by that word. Our whole order rests on it. We are the ones who tell the galaxy what is alive and what is finished, and the galaxy has always believed us, because we have never once been wrong. I am telling you this so you understand what I had at stake the day I watched a human break it. My name is Vol Anseth. At the time of which I speak I was reclaim master of the Grelt yards at the outpost we called Tannic Reach, which sits at the mouth of a dead shipping lane where 3 old empires once fought and left their fleets to rust. We harvested those fleets. That was our trade and our pride. Every wreck that drifted in was towed to the gratting floor, opened, walked, measured, and judged. The viable was stripped and sold. The void was rendered to slag. The line between those two states was drawn by my hand, and the value of my hand was that no one questioned the line. I should describe the place, because the place is part of how it happened. Picture a chamber the size of a town, ceilinged in cold white light from 1,000 panels so that nothing in the yard ever cast a real shadow. Picture gantries and gratting cradles, racks of broken hulls suspended in stasis fields, the long blue trough of the slag throat at the far wall where the void went to die. Picture my graders moving through it in their gray reclaim coats, each carrying a sensor wand and the quiet certainty of a cast that has never been corrected. We did not raise our voices in the Grelt yards. We did not need to. We were the last word on whether a thing could ever be useful again, and we said it softly. The lot in question came in on a contractor's tow, hauled from a debris shoal 2 systems out. It was a mixed lot, the worst kind, not one ship but the scrambled guts of a dozen, fused and torn and frozen together by the slow violence of vacuum. Power cores cracked, conduit lattices sheared, a drive assembly split down its spine, regulator stacks from 4 incompatible manufacturers tangled into one another like the roots of dead trees. My senior grader, a careful man named Resh Tavan, walked it for the better part of a shift. Then he came to me with his wand and his findings, and he said the word, void, the whole lot, slag. I walked it myself, because that is the discipline. I do not sign a verdict I have not put my own hand to. I climbed the cradles and I laid my palm on the cold metal, and I read the readouts and I agreed with him. The cores were dead, not depleted dead, their lattices fractured past any receding. The regulators were not merely mismatched but mutually poisoning, the kind of cross-contaminated stack that fails the instant you try to bridge it. There was nothing alive in that pile. I signed it void, and I assigned it to the slag throat, and I thought no more about it. That should have been the end. It would have been the end on any other day with any other crew, but the lot had been towed in by a human contract gang. I knew of humans then the way one knows of weather on a world one will never visit. They had come into the lanes a few decades before, late and loud and poor, flying patched hulls and taking the contracts no established guild would touch. They salvaged. They hauled. They did the dirty middle work of the reclamation trade, and they did it cheaply, and most of my caste regarded them as one regards a useful pest, tolerated for their labor, never respected for their judgment. They were not graders. They had no standing to grade. They found wrecks and dragged them to us, and we told them what the wrecks were worth, and they took the figure and grumbled and went away. That was the order of things. The human crew that had towed the void lot did not go away. Their foreman came to my arbitration desk the following shift. I remember being mildly surprised that they had sent a single person rather than a delegation, and more surprised by the person they sent. She was not large. Humans are not large. She was past her middle years by their reckoning, gray coming into her hair, her hands marked with old scars and older grease that no washing fully lifts. She wore a salvage rig worn pale at the elbows and knees. She moved without hurry. She had a way of looking at a thing, at my desk, at my grading column, at me, that was not insolent and not deferential, but simply level, as though she were taking a measurement and would tell you the result if you asked and not if you didn't. Her name, the manifest said, was Eddie Marsh. She wanted the void ruling reviewed. Not overturned, she was careful about that, reviewed. She said her crew had hauled that lot a long way on the expectation of a viable grade, and a void grade meant they ate the cost of the tow, and the tow had nearly bankrupted them. She said, in the flat way they speak, that she had walked the lot herself before they ever fired the tow line, and that she did not agree it was dead. I confess I was amused. It is not a feeling I am proud of now. A salvage hand, a hauler, a human, telling a reclaim master of the Oruvith that his viability ruling was in error. I had graded 11,000 lots in my career. I had never been reviewed because there had never been grounds. I asked her, with what I believed was patience, what a hauler imagined she had seen that 900 years of my guild's doctrine had not. She did not rise to it. She said the cores were dead, she'd grant me that. She said most of the regulators were poison, she'd grant me that too. But she said the spine of the drive assembly was only cracked, not severed, and that the lattice damage in the conduit run followed a pattern she'd seen before, the kind that looks total and isn't, and that somewhere in that pile there was enough living metal to wake one working system if a person were patient and did not mind getting their hands cut. She did not say she could do it. She said it could be done. There is a difference, and I marked it even then. I should have simply refused her. The ruling was mine. Her standing to question it was nil. The lot was already queued for the slag. But I have asked myself many times in the years since why I did not refuse, and the honest answer is the worst one. I wanted to humiliate her. I wanted, in front of my graders, in front of the whole quiet certain order of the Grelt yards, to take this human's level gaze and her grease-marked hands and her grant me this, and show the floor what a void verdict means. I wanted to be proven right with witnesses. So I made her an offer, and I made it loud enough to carry. I said the lot was void and would go to slag at the close of the next work cycle. But I said, since she was so certain, I would hold the slag for that one cycle, and I would have the lot moved to an open grading cradle and she could have it. One human, one void lot, one cycle of yard time. If at the end of it she could draw a single functioning system from the dead, anything, by any standard my graders would certify, then I would void my own verdict, refund her tow, and enter a note of correction into the guild record under my own seal. And if she could not, she would withdraw her review, pay a penalty fee for the wasted cradle, and her crew would carry the mark of a frivolous challenge in the contractor registry, which in our trade is a mark that costs work for years. I expected her to refuse. The terms were cruel, and I had made them cruel on purpose. She looked at me with that level look, and she looked past me at the lot hanging in its cradle under the white light, and she was quiet for a moment, doing the arithmetic of a thing I could not see. Then she said, "All right." She said it the way you'd agree to fix a roof, and she asked when she could start. That is the moment if you want one. That is where the day turned, though none of us felt it turn. I thought I had set a trap and lured a fool into it. I had done the opposite. I had handed a human a pile of what my civilization calls death and dared her to bring it back, and she had said all right, the way one agrees to a chore, and gone to find her tools. She started the next cycle at the first light shift, and she did not start by working. She started by looking. This unnerved my graders more than anything she did afterward, though they could not have told you why at the time. An Oruvith approaches a salvage lot the way a surgeon approaches a body, wand first, readouts first, the numbers telling you where to cut. Marsh did not raise a wand for the first 3 hours. She walked the cradle the way I had walked it, but slower, much slower, and where I had been confirming a verdict she was doing something else entirely. She put her bare hands on the metal. She got down into the fused tangle of it on her knees and her belly. She traced the cracked spine of the drive assembly with one finger from end to end, twice, 3 times, her eyes half closed, as though she were reading something written too small for instruments. Now and then she made a small sound, not quite words, and once she laughed a short, private sound at the dead metal, as if it had told her a joke. Reshtavan came and stood beside me at the rail and watched her with his wand hanging useless in his hand. He said she was wasting her cycle. He said she had not taken a single measurement. I agreed with him, and I was glad to agree, because the longer she went without measurements, the more certain I became that I had been right and would be proven right, and that this would be a short and satisfying humiliation. But I noticed, even as I agreed, that I could not quite look away from her, and that none of my graders could either, and that the white light over the cradle had taken on the quality of a thing being watched. In the 4th hour she began to take the lot apart. Not the way we take a lot apart, not stripping the viable and shoving the rest to slag, but more like a body being opened by someone who means to put it back together. She had brought few tools, fewer than I expected, an old fitted case of them, hand tools, things with grips worn to the shape of her grip. She freed the cracked drive spine and set it on a cradle tray with a care that did not match the verdict on it. She pulled the poisoned regulator stack apart unit by unit, and here she did finally use an instrument, a battered field tester of human make that my graders sneered at, and she ran each regulator through it one at a time, and she sorted them, not viable and void, the way we sort, but into 4 or 5 small piles whose logic I could not read. She talked to herself the whole time, low, steady, nomming things, I think, or scolding them or coaxing them. It is a human habit, I have since learned, this talking to the work. At the time it sounded to my graders like a kind of madness, and it frightened them in a way the silence had not. By the end of the first cycle she had not built anything. She had a clean-swept section of the cradle floor laid out with sorted parts, and the cracked drive spine resting on its tray, and her piles of regulators, and a single conduit run she had cut free and coiled. I came down to the rail at the close of the work cycle, and I will be honest, I came down to gloat. I asked her if she had reconsidered. She wiped her hands on a rag that was past helping, and she looked at the laid-out parts and she said, "Not yet, just that, not yet," and she asked if the hold on the slag could run a second cycle. I had not offered a second cycle. The terms were one. But the floor was watching, and I had made my cruelty public, and I found that I could not be seen to fear giving her more rope. So I said yes. I told myself it only deepened the eventual fall. I have told myself many things. The second cycle was when my graders stopped sneering, though no one announced it and no one would have admitted it. It happened the way frost happens, quietly and all at once, and only obvious after. Marsh built nothing for most of that cycle either, in the sense of a finished machine. What she did was worse for us. She took the things we had certified as mutually poisoning, the cross-contaminated regulator stack, the death of which I had signed with my own hand, and she did not try to bridge them, which is the thing that kills you, the thing every grader knows kills you. She isolated them. She took the 4 incompatible manufacturers' units, and she did not force them to speak to one another. She found in her sorted piles the few units of each make whose internal logic ran closest to a common standard, and she discarded the rest. And from the survivors she assembled not one stack but a small chain, each unit buffered from the next by a length of the dead conduit she had cut and recut, and somehow reawakened to carry just enough current to matter. It should not have worked. By our doctrine it could not work. A poisoned stack is poisoned. That is what the word means. But she was not building a stack. She was building something we had no word for, because we had never needed one, because no Oruvith had ever stood in front of a void lot and asked not is this alive, but what of all this death can be made to lean on what. Reshtavan understood it before I let myself. He had set down his wand entirely by the second cycle. He stood at the rail with his hands gripping the cold rail metal, and he watched her chain the dead regulators, and he said to me, very low, so the floor would not hear, that he did not think the lot was void anymore. I told him sharply that the lot's status was mine to say and that I had said it. He did not argue. He just kept watching, and after a while he said, quieter still, that he had been a grader for 40 years and he had never seen anyone treat dead metal as though it were merely sleeping. As though the question were not whether it was finished, but how deeply it was tired. That is the thing I have never been able to put down. It was not strength. It was not speed. It was not some hidden weapon the human had smuggled into my yard. It was a way of looking. We looked at a wreck and saw a verdict. She looked at the same wreck and saw an argument she had not yet won. In the third cycle, and yes, I gave her a third, by then the whole outpost knew. By then ending it would have been the cowardice everyone would have seen. She went to work on the cracked drive spine, which was the heart of the thing. The system she had told me at my desk was only cracked and not severed. I had read it severed. My instruments had read it severed. She did not contest my instruments. She told me when I came down to watch that the instruments were right about the break and wrong about what the break meant. A clean sever, she said, you cannot cross. But this break was not clean. It had failed along an old stress line, a flaw in the original casting, and a flaw is not a death. A flaw is a fingerprint, and if you know how the metal failed, you know how it wants to be held. She did not weld the spine. We would have welded it badly and it would have failed again. She splinted it. She found in the slag queue itself, in the lots I had condemned, the metal already promised to the throat, 2 lengths of casting that had failed along the same flaw line as the drive spine, and she asked my leave to take them, and I gave it because by then I would have given her nearly anything to see the end. And she cut them, and she fitted them along the cracked spine so that the break was held not by force but by agreement. 3 flawed pieces sharing one weakness until the weakness became, between them, a kind of strength. I have built nothing in my life. I am a grader. I tell others what their building is worth. But I stood at that rail and I watched a human take 3 things my civilization had killed and persuade them to hold one another up, and I felt the floor move under a part of me that had never moved before. At the end of the third cycle she powered it. She had assembled from the void lot a thing about the size of a freight loader's core, a buffered regulator chain feeding a splinted, resurrected drive node through a length of twice-dead conduit, the whole of it held in a frame she had welded from cradle scrap. It was ugly. I want to be precise about that, because the ugliness is part of the truth. It was the ugliest functioning thing I have ever seen, asymmetric and patched and visibly poor, a machine with its scars on the outside. No Oruvith would have built it. No Oruvith could have built it, because to build it you had to first stop believing the thing we believe, the thing that is the foundation of our whole order, that the line between viable and void is real and fixed and ours to draw. She did not make a speech. She crouched by the frame and she checked 3 connections by hand, talking low, and then she keyed the field tester and ran a current into the thing, and the buffered chain took it and passed it, and the splinted drive node woke, that dead node, that severed spine I had signed to slag with my own seal, and held a stable output for the duration my own grader's instruments require to certify a system viable. Resh Tavan was the one holding the certifying wand. His hand was not steady. He read the output aloud twice because the first time his voice failed. The number was good. The number was viable. By every standard of my guild, by the very standards I had built my career on, the void lot was alive, and a human had made it so. The floor was silent. We do not raise our voices in the Grelt yards, and we did not raise them then, but it was a different silence than our usual quiet. Our usual quiet is the quiet of certainty. This was the quiet of certainty's absence. 100 graders in gray coats stood at the rails and looked down at the ugly working machine, and at the gray-haired human crouched beside it, wiping her cut hands on a hopeless rag. And not one of them said the word that was their whole profession, because the word had just failed in front of all of them, and a thing that has failed once is never the same word again. I came down onto the cradle floor. I had to. The correction had to be entered, and I would enter it under my own seal as I had sworn, and I am not a man who breaks his word even when his word costs him everything, and that day it cost me everything. But that is not why I came down. I came down because I needed to stand close to her, close to the human and her impossible machine, and ask her the question that I think every Oruvith on that floor was asking silently, the question that was already cracking the foundation under 900 years of doctrine. I asked her how. She did not understand the question at first. She thought I meant the build, and she started to explain the buffered chain, the splint, the flaw lines in the patient, flat way of someone explaining a chore. I stopped her. I told her I did not mean how she built it. I meant how she knew it could be built. How she had stood at the same cradle I had stood at, and laid her hand on the same dead metal I had laid mine on, and read the same severed spine and the same poisoned stack, and seen a viable machine where my whole caste, in 900 years, had seen only the throat and the slag. She thought about it. She did not give me a quick answer, and I have always been grateful for that, because the slow answer is the one that has stayed with me. She said that where she came from, they had never had enough of anything. She said her people were poor and had always been poor and had come up in the lanes flying other people's discards, and that when you are that poor you cannot afford to believe in the word void, because the word void is a luxury. She said a rich civilization can throw a thing away because it can always buy another. A poor one cannot. A poor one learns, generation by generation, that almost nothing is truly dead, that almost everything is only broken in a particular way, and that if you know the particular way, you can almost always make it lean on something else and stand back up. She said it wasn't a skill exactly. She said it was a thing you couldn't help learning, if you grew up where she grew up, with hands and time and nothing to waste. She said it the way you'd state a fact about gravity. And then she said the thing that I have carried up out of that yard and into every report I have ever filed since, the thing that I believe is the true shape of the warning, though it took me years to understand it as a warning at all. She looked at the ugly working machine, and she looked at the slag throat glowing blue at the far wall where I had meant to send it, and she said, almost gently, as though she did not want to embarrass me with it, "You people are very good at deciding when a thing is finished. We never learned how, we just keep going through the pile." I have thought about that sentence more than any other in my life. We just keep going through the pile. It is easy, telling it now, to make it sound like a small thing. One lot. One ugly machine, one reclaimed master's pride, and on the day it was small, a local embarrassment, a verdict corrected, a tow refunded. But I want you to understand what it meant once we let ourselves understand it in the cycles and seasons after, when the report I filed had climbed up through the guild, and the implications could no longer be unseen. Our entire civilization is built on scarcity managed by judgment. We are the species that decides what is worth keeping. Whole economies depend on our verdicts. Whole fleets are scrapped or saved on the word of a greater's hand. Our power, our standing, our 900 years of never being wrong, all of it rests on the unspoken belief that death is a real category and that we are its arbiters. And a human walked into the Grelt yards with a worn tool case and a level gaze and demonstrated, in front of 100 witnesses, that for her people death is not a category at all. It is a delay. It is a particular way of being broken that they have simply never agreed to call final. Think about what that means for an enemy of theirs. I did eventually, and the thinking is what turned my awe to something colder. You can defeat a species by exhausting it, by destroying its factories, denying it materiel, grinding its fleets to wreckage until it has nothing left to fight with. That is how war is won. That is how it has always been won. It works because every civilization we have ever known reaches a point where what remains is, by honest assessment, void. Where the surviving materiel can no longer be made to fight. We know that point. We are the ones who certify it, and a human does not have that point. You can grind a human fleet to wreckage, and the human will walk out into the wreckage with a tool case and a level gaze and start going through the pile. And out of the metal you certified as finished, she will splint and buffer and chain together something ugly that should not work and that works anyway. And she will fly it back at you. And when you grind that to wreckage too, she will go through that pile. And the only way you will ever stop her is to leave her nothing at all, no scrap, no shard, no flaw line to read. And even then, I am no longer certain, because I have learned not to be certain about the word void in front of a human. You cannot deny them resources. That is the thing my whole report came down to in the end, after all the engineering appendices and the certified output figures. You cannot starve them of materiel, because they manufacture materiel out of the wreckage of their own defeats. You cannot disarm them, because what you take from them they rebuild from what you leave behind. We thought our power was that we knew where the end was. They taught us, in one quiet yard under cold white light, that the end is a place only we believe in. I entered the correction under my own seal as I had sworn. I voided my own verdict and refunded the tow and noted in the guild record, for the first time in 900 years, that a reclaim master of the Oruvith had graded a lot void in error, or, as I came to phrase it after long thought, that the lot had been correctly graded by every standard we possessed, and that our standards were the thing in error. That note is still in the record. I am told young graders read it now as part of their training, and that some of them do not believe it, and that the guild keeps the ugly machine itself in a sealed case as proof, because the figures alone are not enough to convince an Oruvith of something an Oruvith cannot bring himself to believe. Eddie Marsh took her refunded tow and her crew and went back out into the lanes. She did not gloat. I want that recorded too, because it is part of the dread and not separate from it. She did not stand on the cradle floor and crow that she had broken 900 years of doctrine. She did not seem to think she had done anything remarkable at all. She wiped her hands, and she packed her worn tools back into their fitted case, and when I tried awkwardly to convey to her some sense of what she had overturned, she only looked at me with that level look and said it was a good lot, and that it had been a shame to send it to slag, and that she was glad we'd worked it out. A good lot. The lot I had killed. She thanked me for the cradle time. Then she shouldered her case and walked out of the Grelt yards, an aging human with grease in the lines of her hands, leaving behind her a civilization that would never again say its oldest word with a steady voice. We render very little to slag now. I changed the doctrine in the years I had left as reclaim master over the strenuous objection of graders who could not bear to stop being the arbiters of death. I could not make my people see machines the way she saw them. That is not a thing you teach. It is a thing you are made by, and we were not made by hunger. But I could make them slower. I could make them hold the slag a cycle longer and walk the lot twice, and ask, before they spoke the word, whether the thing before them was finished or only tired, whether they were certain or only used to being certain. I am old now, older than Eddie Marsh was that day, and I have graded my last lot. I think of her often, and of the ugly working thing she made from the death I had signed, and of the cold blue throat that did not get to swallow it. And when the young graders come to me, as they sometimes do, and ask whether the story in the record is true, whether a human really woke a void lot under my own seal, I tell them yes. And then I tell them the part that is not in the record, the part I have never written down until now, because it is the part that matters and the part I am most afraid of. I tell them that the machine was not the frightening thing. I tell them that the frightening thing was the way she said it, gently, not meaning to wound, that we were very good at deciding when a thing is finished, and that her people had never learned how. I tell them that a species that does not believe in the end cannot be ended. And I tell them that somewhere out in the dead lanes there are more of them than we ever counted, poor and patient and quiet, going through the pile, finding the flaw lines, making the broken metal lean on the broken metal until it stands, and that they are not coming to conquer us, and that this is not a comfort. Because we built our whole order on knowing what is finished, and they walked in out of the wreckage and showed us, without raising their voices, that the word was never ours to say.